Coming to you live from Navasota, Texas, this is Inside Out. And now here's your host, Assaad Mohanna.
Welcome to a new episode of NOV Inside Out, a live cast and podcast where we tell the story of our industry through the experience of leaders in our industry and in business. I am Assaad Mohanna, and I'm glad you're joining us today. On today's episode, we have a special guest. I would like to welcome Dr. Utpal Dholakia, professor of marketing at Rice University. Welcome to the show, Dr. Utpal.
Thanks, Assaad. It's great to be here.
It is great to have you. And I tell you, this is a special one for a couple of reasons. One, this is our second episode in the new studio. So we had our first one last week. This is our second in person in the new Studio 202 here in Navasota, Texas. But also, it is our first virtual guest in the live studio. So we're trying different things. This is the next level of complexity for our team, but I think we're doing great so far. And the one more reason is it is a pretty wet day here in the Houston area, but nothing's going to stop us from coming up here and having this great engagement. So I look forward to talking with you here in this episode, Dr. Utpal. First, I'm gonna run down your rich bio here. I wanna start by saying this is an absolute honor to have you. You're currently the George R. Brown Professor of Marketing at Rice University. You teach electives on pricing and customer experience to MBA students and to help them advance our thinking about marketing and consumer welfare. You study financial decision making by consumers and investors, pricing and marketing strategy for startups, small and mid-sized enterprises, and digital marketing issues. You also conduct research in relational consumer behavior and best practices in conducting marketing research. You've published quite a bit of things in many top marketing and management journals, including the Journal of Marketing Research, Journal of Consumer Research, Marketing Science, Management Science, Psychological Science, the Journal of Marketing, the Journal of Consumer Psychology, and Organization Science, really the big names. You've also consulted widely on design and evaluation of pricing strategies, customer experience strategies, quantitative analysis for obtaining and managing customer information and developing positive ROI marketing campaigns, CRM adoption, and branding issues. You frequently write for the Harvard Business Review, and you have a blog on Psychology Today called The Science Behind Behavior. You have a master's degree in psychology and a PhD in marketing from the University of Michigan, and a master's degree in operations research from the Ohio State University, and a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from the University of Bombay. I was happy with my MBA last week, but you make that look very little. Very, very impressive and rich bio, Dr. Utpal. It's great to have you on. Can I start with a maybe first one and say that can we just not talk about my grades or any grades that we've had during the course? For those who don't know, Dr. Utpal was my professor during my engagement at Rice. So if we have that, we can go on with the show.
Okay, that's a promise, Assaad.
Great.
We will not mention your grade.
That's good. I do want to welcome someone else special on the show as well. We got Shelby Dumaine, who is our social media specialist here live in person in Studio 202. Hello, Shelby.
Hey, Assaad. I hate to correct you, but, when you were listing off why today's show is special, you kind of skirted past a big one, and that is that this past weekend you did graduate with your MBA from Rice. So congratulations. I wanted to make sure we didn't just
Thank you.
blow past that.
Congratulations.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes,
I do look
absolutely.
a bit smarter, don't I? Since
think
last
so.
week. Yeah?
I
No?
think so.
Not
I think
really?
that's what's even more perfect about having Dr. Dholakia on the show. It's going to be really great, kind of tie in both of those. But I did want to mention to everybody watching, if you have any questions for Assaad or for Dr. Dholakia, you can comment those, whether you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. I'm literally here. I got my screens up. I'm in the comments the entire time, so I'm here to make sure your questions get answered. So let us know at any time, and we'll do Q&A at the end.
Awesome. Thank you, Shelby. Dr. Utpal, I'd like to start. I mean, we've usually had guests on the show talk about what the state of the industry has been, market trends, how they're managing during the crisis, what does recovery look like. This one's special because we're really bringing true expertise in a very delicate subject, and it's pricing. Could you tell us a little bit why, from your perspective, is that an important conversation today?
Yes. I've been lucky enough to work on pricing issues in the oil and gas industry for maybe the last 15 years or so. And also, one good thing about my position is I also get to look at pricing in other industries. And so I can kind of like compare and contrast how pricing is being done in these different industries. And so let me begin with one observation, which is that pricing tends to be challenging, and it tends to be a little bit underappreciated and under kind of, how shall we say, attended to in the oil and gas industry. Okay, and so I think it's very important that we begin this conversation by kind of defining the challenge. Okay, and so the first thing to think about is what do we mean by pricing strategy or thinking about making pricing decisions in a strategic way. And here's how I think about it. And so all the listeners who are listening in, I mean, you can think about it whether this applies to your company. Going through a list of questions. Do you have a structured process for pricing your products or services that you go through? Some kind of like a step-by-step sequence of decisions and actions. Do you do that? Do you know which factors to consider in pricing your product or service? And do you know enough about those factors? Are you comfortable with the prices that you have set for your products and services? And what I mean by comfort is psychologically comfortable. You think you are doing a really good job with pricing. Fourth question. Are you able to tell that your prices are good prices or not good prices? Do you have some way to evaluate the performance of your pricing?
Right.
And then, do you have some kind of a feedback process that when you know it's time to change prices, you go back to your procedure and change prices? So these are some of the questions. And when I ask these questions to managers in the oil and gas industry, the answers often are like a little bit shakier. And so to me, that tells me that there is a real opportunity for many companies in this industry to think of pricing in a strategic way.
Yeah, well said. I think there's especially being in a distressed market environment, I think the first place where companies go is typically to manage costs. And I've been in a position previously where really the goal was to protect margins, and by doing that, we're really going after manufacturing costs, supply chain costs, and a lot of times that ends up with sometimes mixed results. The conversation about pricing is a delicate one because not always do we feel that the customer is gonna, accept increasing prices. But what we're talking about here is really not just a bump up of a certain percentage. this is not a cost plus conversation. There's a bit more that goes into that, and pricing structure, if I may, is probably the real important topic here rather than price level. Is that where we're heading with that?
That is exactly right. So great. I mean, this is a great segue to dig into the details. Okay. And so, Assaad, since you just took my pricing class maybe a few months ago, you'll remember that one of my first principles of pricing, and I think this applies especially to the energy and the oil and gas and the energy industries, is that you should raise prices. And if you want to raise prices, how do you raise prices without raising prices?
Wow.
Okay? And so all of the discussion that you have when you price strategically is raising prices without raising prices. And that's where the distinction between price level and price structure comes into play. Okay? So most people, most managers, even really experienced managers, when they have conversations about pricing, always think in terms of price levels.
Mm-hmm.
What was the price we were charging last year? And what is the price that we are going to charge this year? And so that thinking of it, and you can think of it as the MSRP or the list price,
mm-hmm.
or however you think about it. It's kind of like the average price, or the
mm-hmm.
price which is the most visible to managers and to customers. And that is price levels. So, and to me, when we are making pricing decisions, that is the least useful variable in pricing.
Right.
Okay, so that is good to know, but it is really not that useful or effective to act on.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first important issue here is to think about pricing not in terms of levels, but in terms of structure.
Yep.
Okay, so let me kind of like briefly define what I mean by structure. A structure can be a lot of different, so it's all the different pricing activities, the pricing offers, and the pricing changes that you bring into your pricing strategy. It includes things like how do you discount, what do you discount, how do you discount, how often you discount, and what is the depth of your discount.
Yeah.
Okay. It refers to all the different products and offers that you provide to your customers, and this idea of a good, better, best pricing.
Yep.
Which is you offer different choices to customers based on their kind of like interest in quality and their willingness to pay and their price sensitivity. Then it includes things like price bundling. It includes non-linear pricing. It includes even things like financing, for example.
Yep.
And the list goes on and on. And the point, of course, is you can keep average prices, your list price exactly the same, but you can make changes to the pricing structure, and even small changes. If you do them thoughtfully, it can result in a huge impact on performance measures, like whether you measure it by gross margin or you measure it by the revenue or the increase in revenue. However you measure
Yep.
your pricing performance, you're going to see a big impact if you manage your pricing structure carefully.
Right.
Okay? And I can talk a lot about this, but the main point is a pricing strategy doesn't have much to do with changing list prices. It has much to do with managing your pricing structure.
Yeah. And I realize we're trying to fit in a 4 or 5 months course into a 30-minute conversation here, but I think it's an extremely important concept, and I want to reiterate what you just mentioned. You can raise pricing without raising pricing, which is to many is it's an important fact, because what we've seen in our industry, in oil and gas and in energy, and really in anything that's been impacted in the last couple of years, is that pricing has been depressed. There's been pressure to discount. And the challenge from there is how do you pick back up when things start to recover? And as the conversation really starts to evolve around what does recovery look like? Are we seeing more vaccinations around the world? Are people getting back on, in their cars and drive to work and on airplanes to fly? Then, the economy starts doing some recovery, and prices should as well. And particularly for oil and gas, it's not like we come out, we're really coming out from a previous crisis that started in 2014, 2015 that that really never let any room for the industry to pick back up on pricing. So a lot of the conversations around earnings calls that we keep track on has been, okay, how do you recover on pricing? How do you pick that back up? And what you're saying is that there's a way to do that by structuring your pricing differently rather than thinking about it as a level. I might want to ask about simplicity versus complexity of your pricing structure. I remember we talked about that in the past. Could you tell us how does that play out in the pricing strategy?
Yes, exactly. So, and again, so the second corollary, the first principle was how do we raise prices without raising prices? The second principle is that we need a relatively complex pricing structure, not a simple pricing structure. Okay, so just to give you one example, let's say you are kind of like renting out oil rigs, and a simple pricing structure in that case would be one rental price for the oil rig for all customers without any kind of add-ons or anything else that you are offering the customer. That's a simple structure. A complex structure would be a much more customized price. So you're offering maybe rig rentals with different levels of service. Maybe you're adding directional drilling software, and you're adding some people, some technicians to manage that software and so on, and you offer that as an add-on. And so we call that as good, better, best pricing by offering different choices. Then you can make it even more complicated by offering different discount schedules or different kinds of incentive structures depending on how many rigs are rented by the customer. And again, I mean, this can go on and on. So again, to price effectively, you want to move from something very simple, which is just offering a single price to everyone, to a more complex structure where you are taking into account different things like customer value, the customer's prior relationship with you, how profitable the customer is, how costly they are to serve, and those types of features. You are taking them into account and quoting a price and providing more opportunities for yourself to sell higher margin services, for example, on top of your product. And you are doing this on a kind of by customer basis to come up with kind of like a much more overall profitable structure for your product or service.
Right.
So that's what I mean by the complexity of pricing structure. It never pays to have a very simple price, which every customer can kind of like understand and talk to each other very quickly. Okay, it's really beneficial to think through and compose a complex pricing structure.
And I think you're familiar with the conventional pricing model in our industry for drilling rigs, at least in the drilling contractors world. It's a day rate model, which, to your point, I think is a great example where these pricing strategies can come in and get creative around how do you maybe stick to the base of a day rate, but expand on that. And as a matter of fact, several drilling contractors we talk with have bundled some other services with the rig and just kind of worked on these add-ons. Not only that, but also create some sort of incentive, performance compensation. So there's a bit of that, but not enough to really drive the market to a better place. Which I think why what you just mentioned, these strategies are detrimental, not just optional. I think they're an extremely important factor of riding the recovery and improving on the bottom lines. So if I'm I know you touched on a little bit, but I'd like to maybe dig a little deeper on. If I run a company that doesn't have a clear pricing strategy, or we're in a space where we're forced to abide by a particular model, what's your advice to these companies on where to start, and how do they drive that conversation?
Good. So the main point is that what you need, I mean, every company, regardless of how big you are, what experience you have at pricing and so on, you need a structured process to think about prices. Okay, so that is kind of like my first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is like, what is that process? What do you want to think about? And you can go through and make a list of the different factors that you need to consider if you want to arrive at the effective price. Okay, and so let me go. There are 4 of them, and there are only 4 of them. So, and again, this applies to oil and gas, but it also applies to pretty much any other industry.
Sure.
Every industry, you only need to consider 4 factors. Okay, and the oil and gas people are really good at the first factor, which you mentioned earlier, Assaad, as well, which is costs.
Yep.
Okay, so to make a good pricing decision, you typically need to have a good understanding of what your cost structure is, how your costs are changing, and managing costs and so on. But costs, in some sense, set the baseline. They kind of establish what your lowest price can be, because you want to cover your costs in order to survive.
Right.
That is not the way to really price in an excellent way, right? But you would really need information. So costs are critical to know, but they are only one factor. So the second factor that you want to consider, which I think oil and gas people are slightly less comfortable with, is customer value. And so you need, and this I think is critical, which is in many situations, there is really no connection between cost and price.
Yep.
It is really the customer value which is driving the prices, so what the customer is willing to pay for a product and service. And so you need to get some sense of, and there are many methods to do this. That is a really long conversation, but you need some sense of understanding what your customer's value of your product is. And a second important kind of addition to this factor is that not every customer derives the exact same value from a product.
Right.
Okay. And to the extent that you can actually understand and price according to value differences between customers, not just kind of an average understanding of value, you're going to have a more effective pricing strategy. Okay. So that is factor number 2. So first was costs. Second is customer value. The third one is really reference prices. And in the oil and gas industry, this is typically what your competitors are charging. Okay, so the day rate for the rig is kind of like your day rate versus your most kind of like ferocious competitor's day rate.
Yep.
Okay, and every customer is going to use that factor in the pricing decision. So as a pricing manager, as someone who's making pricing decisions, it's quite important for you to know what that customer's reference price is. The customer could also use your own previous price as the reference price in kind of evaluating what your current offer is.
Right.
So a reference price can either be a competitor's price or it can be your own past price, okay, typically. And so these are the 3 factors. And then the 4th factor is your value proposition.
Right.
And again, in the oil and gas industry, like many business-to-business industries, people don't give enough weight to this idea of a value proposition, which is how do you want your products and services to be perceived in the marketplace? Do you want to be the premium provider? Do you want to be the kind of like the economy, the high value provider, or do you want to be somewhere in the middle?
Right.
And clearly, I mean, you are going to use reference prices and customer value and kind of give them weights depending on what your value proposition is, right? So if you want to be the premium provider, you want to be higher priced with obviously with corresponding quality. You want to be higher priced compared to your competitors because you're the premium brand. On the other hand, if you are the extreme value brand, kind of like the Aldi or the grocery store industry or something like that, then you want to be at the low end of that range of prices for that product or service.
Right.
So, but the point is that you need to know as a manager, what is the value proposition that you are choosing for yourself?
Okay.
So without that, you really cannot come up with a good pricing strategy, right? So just to recap, the 4 factors that you need: costs, customer value, reference prices, and then these 3 factors are kind of weighted depending on what your value proposition is.
If you're just joining us, this is Dr. Utpal Dholakia from Rice University, professor of marketing. I want to, these 4 points, Dr. Utpal, I think very powerful concepts. I have to ask, and I know it's a long conversation, how do you measure that value? Or what do you need to, where do you start by measuring that value that you're providing to the customer?
Yeah, good. So now we are lucky in the oil and gas space. We don't have to deal with a very significant form of value, which we see in other industries, which is the emotional value, right?
Right.
I mean, because if you go and look at like, let's say shoes, or you go and look at like cars or something like that, there's a big emotional component to the value.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, people have strong connections to brands, and so they're willing to pay a high amount of money just for how they feel about the brand.
Yeah.
In the oil and gas space, emotional value is kind of like minimal, and which makes it really easy for us. So then value translates much more into an economic value, which is that our product, whatever product we are selling, is actually doing 2 things for the customers. It's either bringing them more revenue, or it is saving them costs.
Yep.
In a nutshell, right? We're really
Yep.
simplifying things. And so measuring customer value is essentially like as an exercise, trying to figure out how much additional revenue is my product bringing the customer, and how much cost saving is my product delivering to the customer.
Right.
Okay. And typically you can do that in cooperation with customers. I've done projects in the past where we have worked with customers to try to figure that out. There are always some customers who are willing to kind of like get on board and kind of like think through this, because it also serves them. It benefits them in really significant ways. Or you can try to estimate it yourself, which is like a much less preferred option. But if you don't have a customer, especially if you are, let's say, a startup company, or you are just kind of like, you don't have that kind of like a relationship with the customers yet, you can try to estimate it. But in the end, customer value comes down to basically an equation listing all the kind of like the economic benefits of your product to the customer in the oil and gas space.
Yeah.
So, and in this calculation, we are giving our brand a weight of 0. We are not calculating that emotional value at all, because of the business to business kind of situation that we are in.
It's amazing how there's an entire process around thinking of strategy. I mean, of course, it's not a surprise to me because I did take your course, but it is it is an extremely well thought process of how do we address pricing and pricing structure, which is very different than pricing level. I want to bring this conversation into context, Dr. Utpal, and I want to get back into the environment we're in. Companies are hopefully starting to see some signs of recovery. We have a desire to start pushing prices higher, which really goes along with start to hire more people and grow back our organizations to the sizes they were in. How do we do that in an environment like this? Where can we start this conversation?
Good. In fact, Assaad, over the last couple of days, I've been writing an article, and I'm pitching it to different outlets, so I don't know where it will be published yet, but I've been writing an article about how to communicate price increases. If you look in the last maybe 3-4 years, maybe even longer than that, the current time is when companies by and large have the most pricing power they have had. Mm-hmm. People are coming out of the pandemic funk. Essentially, they are going out and doing things. They are buying more. Demand for pretty much everything, including all types of commodities, is more. Mm-hmm. And so as sellers, as managers, I think we have more pricing power today than we have had in a long time. The question is, are we confident enough to actually take advantage of that pricing power? Now, in the oil and gas space, I mean, because I've had so many students and I've had conversations with so many managers over the years, the most common thing I find is that everyone has this commoditization mindset. Okay, so the first thing they will tell me when they come to pricing discussion is, oh, we are selling a commodity. We are selling gasoline. There is no pricing power. We just have to take, quote unquote, take the price.
Right.
And I think this is a kind of like a limited and a kind of like a, how shall I say, a helpless way of thinking.
Right.
Okay, because all of the discussion we are having, right, says that, I mean, and in fact, I mean, this is another kind of like basic idea in marketing is there are no commodities. Nothing is a commodity. It is only a commodity if you think it is a commodity.
Okay.
Right, even gasoline, right? I mean, there are huge differences between someone who is trying to fill their Lexus sports convertible with gas versus someone who's filling their kind of like their Toyota, the 15-year-old Toyota Corolla with gas.
Yeah.
Right. So if the manager believes that they are selling a commodity, then that's it. They're not going to do anything.
Right.
What we are saying is that, in fact, every single customer of any product has a different valuation for that product compared to other customers. Right. And with our pricing structure, we need to do some research to find out what those value differences are. But with our pricing structure, we want to come up with a way to get different prices from those customers based on their value differences. Uh-huh. Okay, so that is a basic idea here. And with that mindset, nothing you sell is a commodity because every customer that you are serving has different needs, has different, uses your product slightly differently. I mean, there will not be huge differences, but there are differences, and we want to capture those differences.
Right. And it's, I think I want to link that to something you mentioned earlier about where do you want to position your product or your service? And is that a in a differentiation market where there's very little competition, or is this more of a cost competitive or a price leadership position where you're relying more on volume and kind of tying into commoditization or not? But to your point, I think there's to some people it might be, but there will be differentiation anyway if they desire your product. I want to.
I'll just give you one example, Assaad.
Please, yeah.
So just a few months ago, I did a study on directional drilling guidance software, which is installed on rigs. Okay, and so what we did is we looked at all the prices of the different services which are out of all the different brands. And if you say this is a commodity, it's a directional drilling guidance software, it's being used on the rig, it should cost more or less the same. What I found is in this study is that on the low end, the price for per day price for a directional drilling guidance software is maybe around $300, $400 a day. On the high end, it is about $1,400 or $1,500 a day, so 3 times as much essentially, or even more. Mm-hmm. Okay, and for essentially the what you might say is doing the same basic service. Yeah. And this is what I mean by price structure. So there are companies out there and there are customers out there willing to pay $1,500 versus $300 for the same software, yep, for the same service. So someone is pricing really smart, someone is not pricing as smart, yep. And this idea applies, I think, to pretty much every sector of the oil and gas industry. Regardless of what type of products or services you sell.
Mm-hmm. It's a great example. We come across that conversation quite often, especially with things changing in the directional drilling world, with remote ops and reducing personnel on site. I think it's very timely to start thinking of pricing structures as the model changes, because we're seeing a bit of that. And to your point, it's really how the customer sees it, a lot more so than how you perceive it. It's going back to the customer value concept, which we probably don't do enough of. I want to give a chance maybe to our audience, if you have any questions to Dr. Utpal Dholakia on pricing strategy, to go ahead and type them in. And I'm getting a nod from Shelby here that we do have something from the audience already.
You do, that's right. So this question we have, it's about what should companies who have maybe a long track record in an industry do when a new competitor enters the market in regards to their current pricing strategy?
Yep. Okay. Price stickiness sort of thing.
Exactly. And so again, I mean, the answer is going to be different for the oil and gas industry. So in the telephone industry, and so let me explain. So in the cell phone industry, or the telephones, consumer services, let's say Netflix, things like that. It really depends on like the cycle with which the customer is buying, right? So in many cases, customers have yearly contracts. In some cases, customers have monthly contracts, and so they are locked in. And on top of that, if you're an established kind of incumbent in the market, you have a track record with the customer feels really comfortable with you, and they have huge switching costs. So they might be really not interested in going to an unknown provider, okay? So all this is to say that you have something, we actually have an academic term for this called the incumbent's advantage. Because you're the incumbent, because you're the established provider, you have insulation from price competition from an unknown or a kind of a new entrant. And what that means is you probably should not rush to just cut prices. And as I said before, if you have been hearing, cutting list prices or lowering list prices is a really bad idea unless you do it in a very thoughtful way, okay? So what you can do, so what companies like Netflix do or companies like in the cell phone industry do is they will often have very targeted promotions. So if they think that the customer is at a risk of defecting to this new provider, what they will do is they will offer a discount, or they will kind of like provide, make an offer for a longer term, lock the customer in for a year or 2 years or 3 years, so they don't get a chance to go to the new entrant. Okay. Now you can pretty much do a similar sort of thing in your space, but only if you really feel that this is a strong threat. What might be more likely is that the manager has a false sense of kind of like insecurity that they are going to lose the customer. So make sure that you're going to lose the customer before you offer them incentives. I guess is the way to think about this.
Dr. Utpal, this has been some wonderful, wonderful insight. Shelby, did you have anything else for Dr. Utpal?
Yes, I just wanted to add for our audience, if you wanted to watch this episode back, I know we had a little bit of sound technical difficulties there at the beginning. You'll be able to listen to it. We'll have it on our podcast later today and tomorrow. So you can search Inside Out Podcast wherever you listen, and we'll have the audience or the audio with the full volume there. And if you have any questions on that, you can then email us at socialmedia@nov.com, and we'll make sure to get your question to Dr. Dholakia or to Assaad and get it answered.
Awesome. Thank you, Shelby. Dr. Utpal, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. If people want to get in touch, reach out, what's the best place?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also do a name search for my name, and you'll be able to find my email address. But LinkedIn is best. I love to connect on LinkedIn, and I also post a lot of pricing articles and commentary on LinkedIn. So if you're interested in pricing issues, please connect with me on LinkedIn.
That is extremely helpful, especially for people like me who are LinkedIn junkies. I do appreciate you being with us here, Dr. Utpal. This has been a very exciting conversation. I do want to thank you for all the hard work and great thoughts and insight you've shared with us today. And thank you for being our second guest here in Studio 202. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, Assaad. And I hope your audience is able to use some of these insights and apply them to price more effectively and make some higher profit.
Yes, extremely timely conversation indeed. Thank you, Dr. Utpal, for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been with Inside Out and NOV live stream here live from Navasota, Texas. From our crew here at the Studio 202, I would like to thank our audience. Stay tuned for an episode of NOV Live coming up next with Michael Gaines. And until see you again, take care.